Looks like you caught me doing some reloading. My name is Marty Hayes. I am the president of the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. And today's topic is using hand loads for self-defense. Let me give you a little bit of background. I've been loading ammunition for over 30 years, anywhere from 380 ACP all the way up to 4570 rifle ammunition. And during that time, I've loaded 100,000 rounds, maybe. I don't know. I've never really kept track. But what I use my own hand loads for is both training, competition, and hunting. I do not load them for self-defense, although I am perfectly capable of loading very good, very accurate, very reliable ammunition. The reason that I don't use them for self-defense is that there are way too many legal issues involved. And those legal issues basically will start out with if you use your own hand loads for self-defense, then you're going to open up the door for the prosecution if you end up being prosecuted after an act of self-defense. You can open up that door for the prosecution to use the fact that you used hand-loaded ammunition against you in court. Now, there's going to be some people that say, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to go ahead and click the next video. And, you know, that's okay. If you want to stay ignorant, go ahead. But understand something. In any prosecution for a crime after an act of self-defense, the prosecution is going to have to prove several elements. For murder, they're going to have to prove the element of intent. The person intended to kill them. Premeditated murder, which is first-degree murder, which could send you to the prison for life, or in some states even get you killed, executed. They have to prove premeditation along with the intent to kill. In manslaughter, in some jurisdictions, they have to prove you're negligent or reckless when you use force. So, how does that work with using hand-loaded ammunition? I can see a prosecutor trying to prove that you intended to kill someone by making the argument that you, instead of buying ammunition from the local sporting goods store, you saved all of your brass. You made it really shiny in your brass tumbler. You choose components that would maximize the killing of your ammunition. You choose the best primers, the best powder. Hell, you might even went and got low flash powder so you wouldn't be blinded by the muzzle flash at night. You found a bullet that would explode inside the person. In other words, a semi-jacketed hollow point. And then you bought Dillon Precision or RCBS or even Hornady dies. You use extremely fine quality reloading equipment like my Dillon 550s and 1050s here. You did all this in order to make the very best ammunition you could possibly make because you wanted to go kill someone and you didn't want that bullet to fail. In the case of a prosecution for manslaughter, the prosecutor may prove that your loading ammunition was negligent, that you were careless, that you didn't use proper controls, and they may want to make that argument. They're trying to paint you in the jury's mind as a bad person, as a reckless person, as a negligent person, as someone who wasn't satisfied with the type of ammunition that your local police agency uses, but you had to go and craft your own ammunition in order for it to be really, really, really deadly. And so that's the first problem with using your own hand loads for self-defense. There are other problems too. I work as an expert witness in homicide cases, both murder, manslaughter cases where people are being prosecuted after a legitimate act of self-defense or being over-prosecuted. The charge should have been a manslaughter charge, and they're being prosecuted for first-degree murder. And I'll take those cases too, because I think that under those circumstances, the prosecution is wrong in overcharging crimes. And so I'll help with the defense to get the crime convicted of down to where it should have been charged with. So, having said all that, when I work on a case like this, primarily it's in the field of shooting incident reconstruction. And if I run across a case, and I have before, where a person used hand-loaded ammunition, it is almost impossible to get a good, legitimate shooting incident reconstruction done if there are issues in the case where a person had to recreate the shooting incident. Issues could be ejection pattern testing. If I don't know what ammunition you were using, or as in one case I did here a couple of years ago, there was different head stamps, different casings that were used. The first thing that I'm going to look at is, do I need to do any ejection pattern testing? Is part of the shooting incident based upon where the prosecution is saying that the defendant was standing when the shots were fired based upon where the casings rested? To do that, I need the same gun or an exemplar model. I need the same ammunition, maybe not the same rounds that came out of the magazine, but the same manufacturer, the same weight of bullet, the same lot number if possible, in order to be able to conclusively say in court, I used the very same ammunition that the defendant was using. I used the same firearm that the defendant was using, and these are the results I got when I test fired it for ejection pattern. Of course, I would go on and explain those results. Another issue is be able to prove how close or how far away the defendant was to the person that he or she shot. You do this through three different methods. One is a trajectory analysis. If the bullet had gone like this inside the body, then you know that the person was pretty close shooting down. Or they would have had to be like several hundred yards away and lob the bullets in, which is likely is not going to happen in a self-defense case. Might happen in a manslaughter case for negligence. But the other ways to determine would be stippling tests or gunshot residue tests. Two different things. Stippling is where the gunpowder, in fact, let me show you something here. Look here. The gunpowder. 95% of that powder is going to burn when it's fired, but there's going to be a few flakes that don't burn. Maybe that many flakes. And so when that comes out of the barrel at a high velocity, it will embed into the skin, and many times into the eyeballs if the eyes are open, and create a stippling pattern. That usually you'll be able to prove, usually you'll be able to prove about how far away the muzzle of the gun was to the recipient of the gunfire. And that is by doing your own stippling tests. Same ammunition, which uses the same gunpowder, uses the same primer, uses the same bullet, and then fired out of the same or similar gun. And you do a series of testing from, say, 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches, 15 inches, 18 inches, and you can show then how that unburnt gunpowder dispersed as it got further and further away from the target. And then you compare the, hang on a second, I'm thinking. You compare the density, that's what the word I was looking for, of the gun pattern, gunshot stippling pattern, with what was discovered on the body. Another issue is gunshot residue. Do not confuse that with gunpowder stippling. Gunshot residue is the smoke that comes out, and it gets all smoky, and a certain amount of that smoke is deposited on the target, and it can be deposited basically so you can see it, as in a close range shot. And this would be maybe 1 or 2 inches away, maybe 6 perhaps at the most. Or you can detect it chemically. You can run the clothing through a chemical analysis and then determine about the density of that gunshot residue. A crime lab typically does that. I don't really get involved with doing those tests because a crime lab is going to have to get involved there. But they can basically, what they would do is they would determine, okay, at say 3 feet, there's no gunshot residue. At 2 feet, there's gunshot residue. So we know that he was at least within 2 feet, up to 3 feet or so of the target. Another problem with using your hand-loaded ammunition is introducing the testing from the expert in court. You could say, sure, I loaded up 5,000 rounds of 45 ACP, 200 grain jacketed hollow points using 6.5 grains of Herco powder, and I stuffed 8 in my magazine, about 45, another 8 that I carried with me, and then I kept these other 5,000 rounds available. And so the defense might say, look, all we got to do is just borrow some of these rounds and test them. It is likely not going to work, because the prosecution will claim, Your Honor, you should not allow this testing because the defendant, in fact, manufactured the evidence. He could have manufactured it to show that the individual is 6 inches away, 2 feet away, or somewhere beyond 3 feet. We don't know. And so this is not accurate enough. This is not reliable enough to use in our court of law. And you know, the judge will probably agree with that. Last thing is, if you're using different reloads and you've got different shell casings like Federals or CCIs or whatever, then how do you know there's only one shot or one shooter? There may have been, the case may be made that there was multiple shooters because there's multiple types of casings found. And so that's another issue. That's actually never come up in a case that I did, but I could see it coming up under certain circumstances. What you need is a readily available supply of ammunition. We will get into choosing ammunition for self-defense in a later video, but what I want you to make sure is that you have the same type of ammunition you're using in your carry gun. You have plenty of it to be able to supply your expert if needed, and they should be able to contact the manufacturer and get more if possible. The one last reason that you don't want to use hand load for self-defense is the cost at trial if you do. Your expert witness is going to spend a lot more time and energy trying to make do with your hand loads, trying to make this argument that your loads were not more deadly, that you simply used those for whatever reason you wanted to use them for. And most experts charge between $200 and $500 an hour. Do you have that money laying around? Wouldn't it be cheaper just to go buy some Federal or Spear or Superval and leave it at that? So, we will talk next time about choosing ammunition for self-defense.